G'day. G'day, Stu from UAVfutures here, and today, excuse me, today something pretty special. We're going to be building this tiny quad right here. Now, this is the RS90, and this is probably the smallest brushless build I have done so far. This thing has been an absolute blast flying around indoors, and I'm absolutely loving it. It's getting a lot of stick time around my house. And something crazy about it, it's coming in at about 78 grams. That's without the battery. So a super light little sort of indoor racer. And you know what's kind of crazy? It absolutely hammers outside. I was really impressed with this thing's performance. Anyway, we're going to stick it on the bench and I'm going to show you all the parts that you need to build the thing, and then we'll get started. Alright, let's go! Just one more thing too, a word of warning, this is probably not recommended for first time builders because you don't have very much space in here at all, so it is a very tight build. Anyway, I maybe just want a challenge, but let's get started. Right, so this is a fairly complex build, so let's have a quick overview of everything we're going to need. So we're going to need an RS90 frame, so I've got my sort of top plate and bottom plate just here, and my little flight controller mount. And you are going to need a flight controller. You don't actually need a PDB in this version of the build that I'm doing because we are using the Pico BLX. You're going to need 4 motors and 4 ESCs, and of course that'll be hooked up to some props. You're going to need some sort of receiver, and then on the FPV side of things you're going to need a video transmitter or a VTX, a little camera, an antenna, and this is actually a little FPV camera mount. And then you're going to need a bunch of things like, I guess, some little hardware, little bits, some screws, and little nylon sort of standoffs, some double-sided tape, Velcro strap for your battery, and then we've just got some other little bits of wire. So you're going to need a bunch of little bits of wire as well, and some small zip ties. But anyway, let's get started. I'm pretty excited, and let's start working on our ESCs, motors, and the frame. Now, first things first, before I go any further, what I'm actually going to do is put in the Velcro strap for the battery, because guaranteed I will forget this. I'll be too excited with all the soldering and stuff like that. So I'm going to put in the Velcro strap straight away. So there we go. So that's what I'm going to be doing. Rightio. And let's talk about our ESCs. Now, I'm using some ARM 12 amp ESCs. Now, these are really small, and that is the main thing you need to consider. So you want everything in this build to be super light and super tiny. So that's why I'm going to be using these ARM 12 amp ESCs. So whatever ESCs you do decide to use, make sure they are very small and they're going to fit in this section of the frame. Alright, now the first thing I want to do with my ESCs, and now you're going to do this 4 times, we're going to take off all this heat shrink. So we're going to cut off this clear heat shrink and desolder these 3 wires right here. So these will be the wires that do go to our motors, but we're just going to be direct soldering straight to our motors anyway. So I'm going to cut off this clear heat shrink and desolder those. Alright, so I've stripped all that off my ESCs, and now I'm going to take off these wires just here. And a good little tip, I'm using some blue tack, so I'm just going to squish the ESC in there, and then we're going to desolder these wires. 1, 2, 3. That's how easy that is. Alright, so I'm going to do that to all 4 of the ESCs, and then we'll move on. Alright, so I've got my 4 ESCs ready, and I don't know why this one has a blue sticker. It must have just been made at a different time. But now it is time to put our motors inside the frame, and then we can hook them up to the ESCs that are ready. So in order to get the motors ready, what you need to do, there's these little holes just here, sort of in this sort of the cup of where the motor goes, because this actually goes in not the traditional way. It's actually going to be flying around. This will be the top. So there's actually some little ports just here that we need to run our wires across. So I'm going to put those in and feed the wires through there. Alrighty, and then make sure all the wires are out, and then you can just slide the motor inside. Nice little cup that it's got. I'm actually using Rotorex's 1105B motors, and they spin at about 6,500 kV, so this thing is going to have plenty of power. Okie dokie, so now that's done, I'm going to screw the motor down into place inside the cup. And you notice there's just 4 little holes just here. That's where I'm going to put my screw through and then screw it into the bottom of the motor. Alright, so I've screwed the motors in just here, and it was a little bit more difficult than I was thinking because you might have to sort of swivel. It's hard to move the motor around in there, but once it's lined up in with the holes, it went in fine. Just something to note, when you're putting your motor screws in, make sure you pick the shorter screws because you don't want this going through and touching the motor windings on the inside. So make sure the screws that you pick are probably the shortest ones that are just enough to screw through the bottom of the frame and into the bottom of the motor. You don't want it touching any of the windings inside. Anyway, once you've done that, that to your motor, what you need to do, there's this little tiny hole here in the frame. Just here, we're also going to thread our motor wires through that as well. Rightio, and I'm going to pull them nice and firm, not too hard, and you should have your motor wires coming out just here like that. Anyway, so that's one motor down, but what we need to do that to all four. So I'm going to do that to all four, and then we'll cut back. Rightio, so there it is. There is my four motors nicely screwed in just here, and you can see I've only used 2 screws because I think that's all we're going to need. And now what we need to do is pretty much connect our motor wires up to our ESCs. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just pretty much cut them at the right length, and then we're going to be soldering them straight to these pads here. Now, depending on how you want to mount your ESCs, you may be putting them in a couple of different ways depending on the size of them. What I'm going to do, I'm going to mount them so these little wires right here are running towards the inside, because that's where my flight controller PDB Pico BLX, that's a lot of acronyms, but that's where that is going to be. So this is how I'm going to be mounting mine. So I'm going to cut those to about that length there actually. Rightio, so I've cut my wires just here, and now I'm just going to pull off the outside piece of silicone, so there's just some little exposed wire. You can use wire cutters, but Rotorex have such nice motor wires anyway that you don't need to worry about your wire cutters. And now we're going to pre-tin them so it's nice and easy to solder up. And pre-tinning is just a little process that really helps things. Oh, there goes one of my batteries. Really helps and makes the joint a lot easier. So they're pre-tinned, and now what I'm going to do, I'm going to direct solder them to our motors. 1, 2, and 3. So there we go, there's one. Alrighty, so there it is, and it looks like a bit of a mess of wires right now, but trust me, it will be looking a lot cleaner soon. What we're going to be working on next is we're going to be working on prepping our flight controller ready to put in here, and then we can wire up all our ESCs to it. So let's get started on that. Alrighty, so the flight controller we're going to use is this Pico BLX, and that is fantastic because this is an F3 flight controller. You can hook your battery straight up to it. It is super small, super lightweight, and very, very powerful. So this is going to be perfect for our RS90 build. What we're going to do, we're going to pre-tin a whole bunch of these pads in here. So we're going to pre-tin the ESC pads, so for ESC 1, 2, 3, and 4, and also our battery pads as well. Now, what I'm going to do here, just before I pre-tin these, I'm actually going to feed a little bit of wire through here, so our battery leads just through these 2 holes to make a very strong connection. So simply strip the end of the wires. Oh, it's a little bit tougher than last time. And I'm going to put them through here. So there's my, let me just have a look, make sure you get this around the way. My ground is on this side. There we go. And my voltage is on this side. Push that down, and now what I'm going to do, I'm going to solder it in from the bottom, and that will make for a very, very secure and strong joint. So there's my Pico BLX looking very nice. Rightio, so now we're probably up to the most tricky part of the build, and that is hooking all these ESCs and this big mess of wire up to our little flight controller right here. So you can see on the back of the flight controller there is ESC 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that is going to correspond to these motors just here. So this is motor 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's a bit backwards because it's actually going to be upside down when it's flying, so that's how you're meant to remember it. But essentially, these little pads just here, you're going to have a positive, a signal, and a ground. We need to actually hook that up to here. So we've got our, this is our ground wire right here. Our red wire is going to be our voltage or our positive, and this is a bit of a poor color choice, but the orange is going to be what we hook up to our signal, and we're actually going to desolder this little brown one because that will be the sort of the ground as well. So I'm going to cut them according to their correct length. So when that's sitting nice and snug in here, I'm probably not going to need too much room. So I'm actually going to cut these ESC wires to about this length. That'll trim it up a little bit. Alrighty, so that should be good for one of them, and I'm going to do this to each of the ESCs just to find out how much room I need. Rightio, new strategy, because this is such a tiny build, what I've decided to do, and it was so much easier, I've just desoldered my ESCs from my motors, and I know that I've cut these to the right length and the ESC and the motor wires are the right length. What I'm going to do now is solder the ESCs up first to the Pico, put it in, and then solder my motor wires straight to my ESCs. It's going to be a lot easier trying to then manipulate the board on top of here. So, sorry about that, but it's just a good little learning experience. So I'm going to solder these up now. So I've done ESC 1, so ESCs 1 and 3, and now we're going to work on ESC number 2. And then finally let's put the last ESC in. So I've got my ESCs wired up to my Pico, and it looks a little bit sort of sloppy just here because it doesn't have any form, but once I put it in here and wire the ESCs up, it's going to be looking a lot better. So let's do that now. Okie dokie, so you can see I've wired everything in and I've rewired my ESCs back up now, and I'm glad I did that solution actually. And eventually I'm going to just double side tape these down, but what I do want to do, I'm going to put a little XT30 connector on the end because I want to use some XT30s on my batteries, and this would be a great time to check the motor direction because then we can easily just swap over any two of the wires to make sure that they're spinning the right way, and also plug in your USB because you're not going to have very much access to that later, and set up any modes or any sort of stuff that you need to do on the flight controller. So I'm going to change this over to an XT30 connector, and then we'll cut back. Rightio, so it's all hooked up. I've plugged it into the computer. Everything seems to be going pretty honky-dory. Now what I need to do, I've checked the motor directions, they're correct. What I'm going to do, I'm going to put a little bit of heat shrink just over the ESCs to protect them from shorting. Alright, so that's looking pretty good. I'm going to go heat this up under the hairdryer because I don't have a heat gun, and then we'll be back. Alright, so the next thing we're going to want to do is put in our receiver. Now I'm using a Lemon RX satellite receiver, but you'll notice this is far too big for sticking here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to shrink these cords down, so pretty much cut them and join them one to one just here, and also decase this. So I'm going to cut back to what that looks like because that's a pretty easy step. But by decasing this, you're pretty much just taking the outside plastic off, and then we'll put in a little bit of heat shrink, and it will look a lot neater, and you'll see it is neatly plugged into here. And a side note, this is probably when make sure that your receiver is bound as well to whatever type of radio that you're using. Alrighty, so just so you can see what I've done, I've actually cut the cord that came with the little receiver just here, and instead of plugging it in here, I've just directly soldered it on the back, and then that's going to be able to plug in just like this, and we should have a really nice sort of neat and still detachable little plug. And I'm just going to put some heat shrink around it as well, so let's heat shrink that up. Rightio, so here it is, my receiver's in, it's all bound up and it's neatly sitting in the side. What I'm going to do before I go any further, I'm going to zip tie these ESCs in place. Rightio, so there's one, so I'm going to do that to all 4 of my ESCs and then get back to you. There we go, so it's looking nice and neat. You can see our ESCs are all tied down with some little zip ties through these holes here. Now I'm going to do things a little bit differently to what most people are used to in the RS90 build. So normally you get this plate here, and this is actually for your Afro Mini flight controller that is very, very popular. Usually it sits in here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to mount this upside down and use this to secure and sort of press my flight controller pad right down just there. So it's going to be very snug against the frame. So it's going to make it very, very neat and stop it wiggling or moving around. And then I'm actually thinking of doing some different things with our VTX as well. Now the camera we're going to be using is this micro camera right here, the 600 TVL, and essentially what we need to do, we need to hook up the audio and the video signal to our VTX, and because this one does have a little built-in microphone, and we're going to be hooking up the ground, which is the black wire, these are a bit tangled, and the red one, the voltage, to the little 5-volt pads here on the thing. So we're going to hook it up to the 5-volt and also the little ground on the Pico BLX. But in order to do that, we need to cut it to the right length. So I'd say to get there, it's going to probably need about this much, and we're going to do it, run it up the top through here, much the same way we did with our motor wires just there. So I'm going to do that now, and then I'll show you what it looks like once I've cut it and fed it through. Alright, so you can see I've run my wires up through the middle of the frame, and then I'm going to connect them to the pads. But just before I do and I put them to the exact length, I actually have this kind of cool little camera mount just here. And the way this works is, I actually had to drill a little hole in here previously, but you drill a little hole in here and slide this through, and that is going to hold your camera in place. So I'm going to force my camera into this little square and slide it through and see what it looks like. Alrighty, so that's all secure. Now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to solder in the power and the ground for my camera just here. So for my FPV camera, just going to solder that to the 5-volt pad and also the little ground pad just here that I've pre-tinned. Get these antennas out of the way. And then there's the ground. And then we've actually took the audio cable off actually, because I'm not going to use a little speaker. But then we just have to hook this one up to our VTX. Now, speaking of our VTX, this is where things for this build are going to get a little bit interesting. Now, when it comes to the VTX in this frame, what usually happens is people get a really small VTX and it slides up inside this little slit at the back here, and they direct solder an antenna. But the antenna that the VTX, sorry, that I've been sent to put in is this Hawkeye one just here with this pigtail. And to be honest, I don't think it's actually going to fit if we try to put it in the traditional way that is mounted in the RS90. So there's a couple of different things we can do. One, we can put the VTX on the top and run the antenna out the back. Two, we can try and I guess mod another type of VTX and see if we can fit that in here. Or three, we can possibly see if we can squeeze the VTX somewhere on the inside. I'm not 100% sure which one I'm going to actually do, because I'm going to need a bit of a play around and see how it goes, but I'll let you know anyway. So what I do think I'm going to do though is take off this SMA connector so I can just direct solder an antenna, and that's going to give me a bit more room. But yeah, we've had a look. So I've got a couple of different VTXs just here. So I'm going to have a bit of a play around, and then I'll cut back to how I did it and what it looks like. So that'll just save you guys a bit of time, and it'll save me some time filming 3 different ways instead of just finding out the one way that I want to do it. Now, one of the easiest, wow, this is still hot. Now, one of the easiest ways to get the antenna off just here, the SMA connector or the RP SMA connector, usually they are hard soldered on here and you have to cut them. Look, my camera cut out just as I was recording this, but what actually you do, just heat this bit up with your soldering iron and keep heating it up, and then eventually it will become so loose it will melt all the solder joints at once, and you can just slide it off. I'll leave a link down below too. I think Joshua Bradwell's got a great video on how to get these off. Alrighty, so after much debate, the way I actually did it, and look, the RS90 pros aren't probably going to like this, but what I actually did do is I cut the back out of the RS90 frame. So it's probably going to be a little bit less structurally sound, but that's going to allow my VTX to sit nicely in here, because look, I could have put it on the top and floated it around, but it really is made to go at the back of the frame just like this, so that's where I'm going to be putting it. Alright, rightio, so next up, let's work on attaching an antenna to it. Alright, so I've got my little micro sort of light circular polarized antenna here, and what I need to do is connect that up to my VTX. So I want mine to be about, let's say, this long sticking out the top, so I'm just going to snip that off just there. Rightio. And essentially this has the shielding on the outside, which is the ground, and there is a tiny little wire in the middle, which is the signal. So we need to connect the ground up to the outside pads just here, and the ones on the back, and the signal we're going to solder up to the middle pad just here. So the first thing I'm going to do is just sort of cut around the outside just a little bit and strip back some of the plastic. Alright, so you can see I've stripped back some of the sort of outer sort of coating, and then this is the shielding, which is also going to be the ground just here. And now we need to strip back this little bit of sort of white bendable plastic in the middle to expose our little signal wire. Now you need to be very careful that you don't just cut this, because otherwise you're going to have to do the whole process again and make it even shorter. There we go. So you can see just the tip of the signal wire exposed there, and then the 2 grounds on the outside radio. So I'm going to pre-tin these. And now we can actually hook it up to our antenna. So there we go, there's our VTX hooked up to our antenna. What I'm going to do, I'm going to hit this with some hot glue so it's sort of well protected. Some people might use some araldite or something a bit stronger to hold it in place if they need to, like some epoxy or something. Rightio, so now we've got our VTX all soldered up. What we need to actually do is connect it to, I guess, our PDP or our flight controller. So the red wire, that's going to go to the positive. I'm just going to tack it on straight onto the battery lead just here, and the same with the ground. I'm going to put that to the ground of the battery. And then the yellow wire, we're just going to cut that and then join that straight up to the little yellow wire of the camera. So I'm going to do all that now and show you what it looks like. Right, here it is. You can see running from the VTX all the way down here, and then I've got my power and ground just here, and then I've connected up the camera to the VTX video on the yellow cable. Now I guess the exciting part, I'm going to put that little brace in just here, screw it down, or at least press it down and see what it looks like. And then we can get ready putting the props on and setting it up for flying, and maybe I'll glue in the back of the VTX and we'll have a look. Alrighty, now what I've decided to do, because I've built mine a little bit differently, I'm actually going to use just a piece of foam instead of that frame there. I think I was a little bit worried about the wires coming around the outside just here and getting cut by the props. So I'm actually just going to use a bit of foam, and then I can run the wires a little bit closer. And now what I need to do, I'm going to put these standoffs in each one of these parts, and then I'll be able to screw the carbon frame down. Alrighty, so here it is, and I've screwed the bottom carbon plate on, and I've got to say, I love this little quad. I think it looks awesome. I really like the style that it's going, and as soon as I put this on, I don't know what it was, it just really completed the build for me. So when that carbon was on the bottom, I thought it looked fantastic. Now you can see I've just glued in my little VTX at the back. If I had some epoxy, I would probably use that, but I've just hot glue, and because this is probably going to be mainly for inside anyway, I think it's going to be okay. When it comes to putting the props on, you're going to have two styles of props. You're going to have some you're going to have some clockwise props, and they'll need to go on motors 1 and 4, and the counterclockwise props, are going to go on motors 2 and 3. So these ones need to spin this way. You'll see this motor diagram anyway that I'll put just here, and that should make it a little bit easier. And it actually looks very interesting, I think, too, looking at this for the first time, seeing that this is the top and this is the bottom, because most of this build we've been looking at it from this direction. So very, very cool. Anyway, let's weigh the thing. Let's see how much it weighs. Alrighty, so we'll turn on my scales just here, and let's see. It is coming in, take your guesses, coming in at 78 grams. And I've seen some even lighter out there as well. If you change some of the wires and made these smaller gauge wires and really strip this thing down to the bare minimum, I've seen some that are like sub 70 grams. So a super light quadcopter. Let's put a battery on and see how much it is with the battery actually. Alrighty, now this thing can run 3 or 2S, so it's going to be an absolute rocket with a 3S battery on, but let's see how light it is with the lightest battery. So this is a 460 milliamp 2-cell battery, and it's coming in at 109 grams. So a super light quadcopter would be really cool actually. I think once I cut some of these cables down even shorter to see how close we could get it to 100 grams. So there it is. There's my build guide to building the RS90, which is probably one of the smallest indoor brushless quads that you can build. And if you were going to the extreme, you probably could take out some of the wires in this part and put some smaller gauge wires in there and make this thing. I've seen some online on the RC groups probably coming in at a little bit like 65 grams, so some super light builds in there. And speaking of RC groups, a massive shout out to Val Helly, because without his help and his support, I couldn't have got this video done. So it's pretty much because of him that we've been able to make this build video. So if you use this build or you find it helpful, definitely check over the RC groups thread, and I'll leave the link below, and drop a big thank you to him. I'm going to leave you guys with some flight footage of this thing hooning around the house, and a little bit of it outside as well. Subscribe for more FPV related content, and as always, happy flying! Feels right. Feels right. Then it feels right. Feels right. So right. Feels right.